Hi, I'm Melina Tag and I'm speaking to Mel Noakes today. I'm really excited about this episode as we're talking about the ABC of Selfcare. Mel is a self-care coach and one of the UK's leading health coaches and self-care experts. She's the author of The Little Book of Self-Care, published by Penguin in 2017, and you can get yourself a copy on Amazon. Mel specialises in working with busy professional, high-achieving women to balance their professional success and personal health and happiness. I hope you'll enjoy that conversation. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So my first question is about your reset story and how you became a self-care coach. So I've read your book and I've read how you've overcome your eating disorder and low self-esteem. Can you tell us about where these came from and how you've tackled them and how you ended up become a self-care coach?
Yeah, so you're right. I did suffer with eating disorders for many years. So I guess my eating disorder story really starts far, far earlier than it actually did. So I developed an eating disorder when I was 12 years old. I had both anorexia and bulimia. Like most women, I like to overachieve. So why have one if you can have two? And I actually developed that eating disorder in my early teens, but really and truly it stemmed from a lot of things that went on much earlier. So I lost my biological father when I was 18 months old. And I think that had a massive impact on me and made me feel really insecure about certain things and really quite sensitive to the world around me. And in later years, when I was bullied at school and I had various people say things to me that weren't necessarily that helpful, a lot of things combined. And actually, sadly, for me, the way that I coped with feeling out of control with things was through controlling my eating. And I found it to be a real comfort, I guess, in a time that was really unstable in my life and I really didn't know what was going on very much. And obviously, when you have an eating disorder, the thing that you're not doing very well is looking after yourself. And actually, the way that I didn't look after myself was characterised in many different ways. It wasn't just through food. You know, I had really bad relationships. I wasn't a very good friend at the time. I didn't sleep well. I wasn't, really partaking in my life in many ways. And fundamentally, I was trying to punish myself in many, many, many different ways. And the eating disorder was probably the most obviously destructive because I was physically very thin. I was very ill. I was hospitalised with it. But actually, I was not looking after myself in many ways. And really and truly that lasted from 12 until my late 20s, and in that time I had actually managed to be successful in spite of it. I went to university, I got an incredible job, I was working in the events industry, and I had a very high profile role at a very, very young age. I was the head of a global department at 25. I worked really hard and actually pushed myself to burnout as a result of it. And again, that was very characteristic of the kind of person I was, always trying to overachieve, always pushing, always looking for the next thing, always putting myself last, trying to do a million different things all at once. And actually the change for me came when I stepped out and I took a sabbatical. I during 2009, I think it was.
Okay.
You can tell I've just had a baby because dates and things don't really line up anymore in my head. But 2009, I took a year out and decided that I really needed to go and start to tackle some of these demons that I had. And the best way that I knew to do that was to go travelling and to get some real perspective and some real time out. So I took a year to go to Latin America, and I actually spent a year travelling around. But the epiphany for me happened quite early on, and I talk about this a lot because it was such an unexpected moment for me. I did the 4-day Inca Trail hike, and it was something that had been on my bucket list for years. And I managed to do the 4-day trek, which is the classic Inca hike. And as we got to the final day, we came up to the Sun Gate, which is the moment where you sort of come down into Machu Picchu after this long hike. Mm-hmm. I remember just starting to feel really emotional and not really understanding why. And I remember standing, I finally got to the top, and you look down at Machu Picchu and you see the view, which is the really famous picture postcard view. Mm-hmm. And I just burst into tears. And I think in that moment, something just shifted for me. And I was totally dumbfounded and amazed by my body. I could not believe that I was able to do the 4-day Inca hike, because I had had eating disorders for 15 years, and they say, you know, the longer you have it, the less likely your chance of survival is, and the yearly you become, your body is obviously very frail and has been, you know, a battleground essentially for many years. And I couldn't believe that despite all of those things, I had been given the privilege, and my body had sort of fought back against me, if you like, and given me the opportunity to do something that amazing. And in that moment, I vowed that I would never battle my body again, and that I would help other women realise how amazing they were. And so that happened at the very beginning of my trip, and I spent the rest of the year sort of doodling, thinking about how I would go about things, knowing that I didn't really want to be a classic therapist, but I wanted to help in some way, and I didn't know what that was. And when I came back from that trip full of ideas and expectations and hope, and like, oh my God, like I had like a battle cry going on inside me, I discovered coaching, and it just felt right. And from there on in, I studied and really trained myself in understanding coaching and different ways of helping people. I trained as an NLP practitioner. I also did a nutrition diploma, because for myself, I really wanted to understand food, because at the age of 12, I had no idea how to nourish myself. And I combined all of these things with the work I was doing with women. And my big why, I guess, is to help women love their bodies. But what I realised I was doing was actually teaching women to take care of themselves in a much bigger context. It's not just the way that we fuel our body, it's the way we fuel everything for ourselves, our lives, our minds, what we do to ourselves. And I realised that food was one big component, but it wasn't the whole thing, which is how I sort of became the self-care coach, because I realised actually what I was doing was teaching women to take care of themselves and to be successful without causing damage to themselves. So yeah, that's how I came to be, I guess.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing journey that you've had. You must have a lot of courage to actually do that, like change completely your mindset and your way of living and your view on how to take care of yourself. It's an amazing shift. What would you say is the definition of self-care? Because it can be a bit of a broad term, and why do you think we need it, or we need it more?
So that's a really good question, because self-care has become Instagram fodder. It's a hashtag. It's, you know, self-care Saturdays, and it feels like it can be a bit wishy-washy, I think. I think actually that does nobody any good to have a wishy-washy definition of it, because it's a fundamental part of our well-being. So for me, self-care really is the way that we nourish ourselves. It's the actions we undertake to look after ourselves. And that is not just physically, but it's also emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And it's why I break down my book and the work that I do into 3 sections, which is, you know, mind, body, and life, because ultimately you can't look after yourself in one way and not other ways and expect there to be a harmonious, your life to be harmonious. It's about looking after yourself in a 360 context. And sometimes certain things might take priority. It might be that one aspect becomes a focus for a while, or one aspect needs extra attention. But it's almost like it's the 3 legs of a stool, and if you take one leg away, can't stand. So for me, self-care is that 360 way that we look after ourselves and nourish ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more of a holistic approach to ourselves, right?
Yeah, it's the way we fuel ourselves. It's how we live our lives and make sure that we live the best lives that we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so what do you think we should do this? Is what kind of benefits you would say are the first benefits that you get once you start looking after yourself a bit more?
Oh, that's such a good question. The first benefits, I think what's interesting is that there are multiple benefits. So for example, for me, when I started to look after myself, and I see this in a lot of my clients as well, you start in one area and you start doing simple things to change things, and the ripple effects are huge. So you never really know what you're going to see first, but things snowball very quickly, because essentially what you're doing is fueling yourself. And it's like I hate this car analogy because our bodies are really complex and we're complex beings. It is the best analogy that I have for self-care. You know, if you have an incredible machine outside your front door that has, you know, let's say it's a Ferrari and it's beautiful and it's got a gorgeous colour on the front and, you know, all of the machinery inside works beautifully and it's great. But if you don't fuel it and you don't clean it, it gets into disrepair really quickly. But the second you fuel it correctly, everything starts working properly. The cogs start turning well. You know, you clean the car and you can see the beauty underneath. It's like suddenly, and I always joke that my car runs better when I clean it. I have a Ferrari. Maybe one day I'll have a Ferrari. But it's that kind of thing that actually, if we fuel things in the right way, it works better and it works more efficiently. It works more effectively, and it enables you to do things much better. So for me, self-care is around giving yourself the opportunity to live your best life. And I think that, for me, you know, living an extraordinary life is something I talk a lot about, simply because my dad was so young when he died. He was 36. And I think how short his life was and how little he really got to experience, and but also how fortunate he was, you know, in the time that he lived, the things that he experienced and the things that he did. And I always think life is so short for us and we never know. You know, it's short if it's 80 years or 70 years, but some of us it's even shorter still, and it's, you know, 36 years or less. And I think we owe it to ourselves to live as best a life as we can, because I always think you don't want to lie on your deathbed and think, well, what if I'd have done this differently? What if I'd have done that? You want to lie on your deathbed and think, you know what, I had a great innings. I did everything I wanted to do. I embraced life and I lived it to its full. And I think self-care enables us to do that because we're giving ourselves the right platform to spring from.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's the best definition for self-care. Not only it makes you feel better and perform better, I think it's living life to the fullest, for sure. It can be amazing when you do that. So why do you think we don't do it sometimes, though? It feels that you can come across a bit some like superficial or selfish when we look after ourselves. Like, it has a bit of a bad rep somehow. Well, it's changing now, but I feel like it can even feel a bit arrogant, you know, if you look after yourself and put yourself first, rather than looking after others all the time.
Yeah, it's something that I come across actually a lot, and pretty much anytime I work with my client, the first thing they'll say to me is, you know, I'm not a selfish person. You know, I love people. You know, it's not all about me. And the reality is, we live in a world where stress and burnout is rife, where 1 in 4 people in the UK have a mental health disorder, where we're constantly at odds and burning ourselves out. And actually, the fundamental need is to look after ourselves. And the reason that we don't do it is because we're taught really early that somehow putting ourselves first is selfish. And the way that I would always counter that is, well, actually, it's in order to help people, you can't give from an empty well. If you are genuinely wanting to serve and be there for other people and do the things that you want to be doing, you need to be a strong foundation. You need to be strong enough to do that. And if your well is empty and if you're constantly depleted, worn out, burnt out, exhausted, how on earth can you serve? How can you give from that place? It's impossible. But also, you're setting the expectation for other people, and the example to other people, so that they also don't look after themselves. And I always think about this, you know, if you had a daughter or a niece, or, to be honest, sons, nephews, you know, if you have young people around you and you think about what you want to teach them to do, you want them to look after themselves, you want them to be well and healthy, and you want them to, you know, be able to give. And we teach that to our young people, but we don't do it for ourselves. And I think a lot of it comes down to this idea that we're taught very young that somehow looking after ourselves is selfish and putting yourself first is wrong or bad. And I understand that, because we're teaching people to share and think of others. But actually, if you want to help others and you want to think of others, the best thing you can do is set a good example and take care of yourself, because then you have the energy to do the things that you want to do. So, yeah, I think it's a tough one. And I think, as you say, things are shifting, and I think people are understanding that. And I think, you know, it's really important for me, it's that setting an example and being the change you want to see in the world. And when there are so many disorders that are coming from overworked, stressed out, burning out, trying to spin so many plates. Actually, that isn't working. We need a different way. And the different way is to start looking after ourselves and not in a selfish way, not to be arrogant and to put other people last. But it's, my friend Susie actually says this really beautifully. She wrote the Self-Care Revolution, and she says, it's not me instead, it's me too. And I think that's a really beautiful way of phrasing it. It's that understanding that you're important too, and for you to really do the work that you're here to do, you need to be strong enough to do it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's excellent. In your book, you are giving away 50 things to do for yourself when you are having a crappy day. And I love this because I think we all have crappy days, and sometimes more crappy days than good days. And so I was wondering, where do you think we should start with our self-care? Because there's plenty of things that you can do. But even on a good day, like what would you say you should start doing, for example?
So I would always say to anyone, when you're starting with self-care, the place to start is in your mind. And that's why mind comes first in my book. It's why whenever I work with my clients, the mind stuff is the stuff we work on first, because what goes on internally is manifested externally. And there's a brilliant quote that I actually reference in my book that says, one comes to believe whatever one repeats to oneself often enough, whether it be true or false. So the best place for me to start is with the stories that we tell ourselves, with the things that we say to ourselves. And I think it works in tandem, so it's an interesting one. So I'm going to cheat a bit here and say two things. So you start with your minds, but for some of us that can be really difficult, because the mind, if we're so used to telling ourselves negative stories, it can take a while for that to shift and for that to change. And it's not something that happens overnight, but it's the continual everyday dedication to being kind to yourself. And for me, I found within my own journey that actually it was those daily acts of kindness to myself that helped shift the voice internally. I knew that's what I needed to work on, but it was such a strong force after 15 years of telling me that I was undeserving, unworthy, unlovable, all of these things that I tell myself, that actually those simple acts of, buying myself flowers, or, taking the time to put beautiful body lotion on, or, putting something beautiful on that made me feel good and made me feel, smile when I saw myself in the mirror, or wearing my favourite scarf or perfume. They're really simple things that feel really inconsequential, but actually being kind to myself physically, like in the real world, really helped shift the mental pattern in my head, because I started to understand that I was deserving of those things. So it was a blend of both. So you really do need to start with the mind, because that's where everything stems from. That's where everything comes from. But sometimes that can be a really tough thing to shift. So those simple acts towards ourselves can really help. So it's a mixture of the two, I'd say. So yeah, I'm totally cheating there and answering with two things.
No, it's so good. And the fact that you have to keep consistent as well with that. I think that's a great point that you make there. I've really enjoyed 3 areas of your book, actually. So the first one was overcoming perfectionism. The second one was the comparison is the thief of joy. And the third one was the illusion of busyness. And if we can talk about each of them a little bit more in detail. So, for example, with overcoming perfectionism, is this something that you've experienced, and how does it impact our well-being as such?
So perfectionism in itself can be a really powerful thing. It can really push us to excellence. But there's a lot of research that shows that perfectionism can actually tip over into becoming quite I don't want to say dangerous, but I can't think of a different word at the moment, but quite a dangerous sort of habit to form, because perfectionism can drive us to stress, burnout, and lots of other things, mental health disorders as well. Dyslexia in particular is sort of those tendencies of perfectionism can lead you down to those sort of paths. That's not to say everyone who's a perfectionist is going to end up with an eating disorder, but those kind of traits are very symbiotic of mental health disorders. And actually with perfectionism, what we tend to do is believe that the world is in absolutes. It's either perfect or it's not, and it has to be perfect to be good. But actually there's a real world of grey in between that. And one of the things that I've personally found in running my business is this idea of, imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. And it's that sense of moving, getting things done, getting things out there. And, there's a real terminology that goes around the tech world in companies like Facebook and things like that, which is like fail fast and learn fast. It's that idea of actually trying things and seeing what works, what doesn't, learning from it, and actually using that to fuel you to progress and to better yourself. And I think that's what I try to really focus on in the book and try and help people do. It's not this idea that everything has to be perfect, but it's this idea of striving for progress, for growth, for opportunities to learn, for understanding that not everything will be the right thing to do or the perfect thing to do, and actually being real about that rather than perfect. And I've learned that a lot even recently in motherhood. I think all of us have this idea of the perfect mother will be, and we're going to batch cook and bake everything from fresh, and our babies are going to be beautiful, and we're going to have all of these things in perfect order, and the reality is it's not like that. And when you have those conversations, and it's funny, I've only known this since being a mum, like reading books that I read before becoming a mum, and there's one that I'm reading now, Hurrah for Gin, which I sort of laughed at as I was going through before becoming a mum. And then you realise when you're honest about your struggles, or when you open up about things not being perfect, or where things are a bit tougher, the response you get back, because people resonate with it, because they understand that they're not perfect too. And I think it gives other people permission to sort of explore that for themselves, and to realise that they don't have to step up to this ideal as well. So it's all about not only enabling yourself to be less than perfect. None of us are perfect. None of us have reached nirvana and are in that perfect state. And in doing so, it allows other people to be honest about where they're at as well. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. So yeah, I always talk about striving for progress, striving for growth rather than perfection. It's a much healthier pursuit, and it's a much more attainable pursuit.
Totally. But funnily, perfectionism doesn't have a bad rep. If you say, for example, in an interview, when they ask you what are your strengths and weaknesses, and you say, I want things to be perfect. Actually, they like that, but they don't see the downside of it all. Like what it says, behind the scenes, that maybe, it can be overwhelming, can't maybe make some decisions. Like, you see what I mean? It's funny how perfectionism doesn't have a bad rep at all, and it can be, somehow dangerous for ourselves.
Yeah, and a lot of people, if you are a perfectionist, and I know that this comes out a lot in sort of professional contexts as well, people, that can mean that it's really hard for them to relinquish control, it's hard for them to delegate, they'll stay and agonise over every email, or, if you've got to produce something, it will take them hours to proofread it or check things. If you've got to do a presentation, you'll spend 6 hours making sure every single thing's fine when 2 hours would have done, so it can actually be quite draining to be a perfectionist. So yeah, I think there's two sides of it. If like I said at the beginning, it can be the thing that drives you to excellence and to want things to be good. But if it goes too far, it can very, very quickly tip into other things.
Yeah, exactly. And so what about, so comparison is the thief of joy. And this obviously made me think of, social media and how it can be bad for us. And you touch on that in the book as well. And it triggers feelings of low esteem. So it's proven that we start comparing ourselves and we feel unhappy if we compare to other people in general. So what would be your advice to maybe stop comparing and keep a healthy perception of our own self? And it's actually difficult to stop comparing, I think.
It is. It's human nature, we are designed to evolve and to progress and to constantly better ourselves. And the way that we do that is to look around us for examples of what's going on and to benchmark ourselves. And, back in the heady days before social media, we would compare ourselves to the people around us. We would only have access to our immediate surroundings. So it would be, Nora next door, or Ben in finance, or Sarah down the road, or, your contact at work. We had a very small sphere of reference of which we compared ourselves to. Whereas nowadays, with social media, as you rightly pointed out, we have access to pretty much the world. We compare ourselves to all of these different things, and actually it's celebrities, it's neighbours, it's long lost friends, it's people across the world. And actually what social media does is, and I talk about this a lot, is that it presents people's highlight reel. It very rarely presents the realities of life. Things are airbrushed, stories are airbrushed. People will only put up the things that they really want you to see. And actually what we've started to see in social media, which I think is a really positive trend and really empowering and insightful, is there's a lot of people now posting the almost behind the scenes style stuff and the realities of the day. And you see a lot of mum bloggers, wellness bloggers talking about what it's really like and the realities. And there's been some incredible work done, and you see some incredible responses to that, because people, again, it's like the perfectionism in you acknowledging and admitting that not everything is perfect, that life isn't easy, that, these Instagram pictures that you've been putting up aren't all rosy and aren't the full picture. People connect to you because they go, oh my God, that's real life. That's what I'm going through. And I found it really hard to talk about it. And, we see this with mental health at the moment with Prince Harry and the Duchess of Cambridge. Yeah, the Duchess and Duke of Cambridge talking about mental health and the work that they're doing. The amount of discourse there is in the public now about mental health, it's almost becoming acceptable to talk about it. Whereas when I had an eating disorder, talking about anorexia or bulimia in public, or admitting that you had something like that, was pretty much career and personal suicide. People didn't want to come near you because they didn't understand it, or work was scared to employ you because they thought that there might be some sort of problems with it. Whereas now the conversations are much more open and things are changing. So, I think it's really important to have those conversations. So in terms of what we can do about it, I think one thing is to understand that what we look at when we're comparing is probably not the real picture. It's not the full life, and to understand it's probably an edited Photoshop highlight reel. And one thing that I recommend to clients a lot is if you do find that there are certain feeds that you are following, be it on Instagram, on Facebook, on Snapchat, on any other channel, that you feel in any way inferior or less than, or that you go to and you can feel yourself comparing against and feeling like you don't measure up, quieten them for a few days or unfollow them and see how that changes your perception. Because often we're almost drawn like a magpie to these things, whereas if they're not there, we can start to actually feel better about ourselves and focus more on the things that are important or the things that are in our own lives. And that can be really helpful. And so for some people, they never turn back on that channel. For some people, they just need like a breather for a little bit and they can go back to it. And that was enough to refresh them and put things in perspective. And the other thing to do is to really focus on your achievements and the things that are working really well for you, because the reality is we never really know what's going on for anyone else. You can look across at your colleagues, your friends, you can look on social media, but none of us walk in anyone else's shoes. We don't know the challenges that those people are facing. So a really nice way to do that is to just focus on your achievements and the things that you're doing. And I always like to encourage clients to buy a little beautiful notebook and write their own achievements down or things that they're grateful in their own lives for. It could be a gratitude diary, it could be a celebration diary, it could be an achievement diary, whatever you would like to call it. But a place to record the things that are going well for you, so that whenever you're having those moments where you're like, oh, things aren't great, and look at so-and-so, they're doing so much better than me, or she's so much further ahead, you've got a place that you can go back to really acknowledge the things that are good in your life and the things that are working well, and to just refocus you and to help you remember the things that are great already, even if you're not exactly where you want to be. Life is part and parcel of the journey. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great advice. That's true. Like refocusing on what you are doing, what you want to do, and not being constantly connected to what others are doing on social media, especially. That's the way to go for sure. it's so important that we spend the time on us rather than being distracted the whole time by what other people are doing. The last thing that from your book that I really, really loved was the illusion of busyness, and that's probably because I see myself in it, if I'm honest. I'm just trying to understand because so I've done further reading on that, and apparently it can show a sign of insecurity, which I wasn't aware of. And I personally love being busy all the time and having loads of things to do, you know. And I was wondering, is it bad for me? You know, how much is too much? And do you want to explain, what are the beautiful boundaries that you mention in your book?
Yeah, so I love that you picked up on the three things in the book that are all sort of in some ways interconnected. This idea of being perfect, of comparison to others, and busyness, because they are three topics that I think are very front and centre for many successful and ambitious women in today's society. You know, we want to be busy because we feel like being productive, and being busy is a sign of success. And actually, busyness in itself is not necessarily a problem. I think busyness becomes a problem when it depletes you in some way. So I'll give you a very personal example. I love to be busy as well. For me, I took busy to a different level. So I had one weekend where my best friend was coming back from Sydney. So I went to pick her up at the airport at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Spent the whole day together. Another really good friend was having a birthday in Birmingham. So I got on the train and went to Birmingham and spent the night with her. Then got the first train back because my nephew was having a christening the next day, which I had to go to. So I went to that. And then my friend had an engagement party that evening. So I met my friend from Australia for lunch, went to the engagement party. And by the time I got to the engagement party, I'd been awake for 48 hours and was exhausted. That's an extreme example. But we all do things like that, where actually the busyness can start to become exhausting and depleting, and we don't have any time for ourselves, and there's no real space to breathe in between the busyness, because we're constantly jumping from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and you know, trying to juggle different things, and we're constantly feeling like we're letting people down, or we're not getting around to things enough, or there's, you know, someone will phone us and be like, I really want to see you, and you want to see them, but your diary is full for 3 months. And you know, even in the way that I'm speaking, it's that sort of fast pace, oh my God, I've got to keep going, I'm on this sort of treadmill. That is when busyness becomes a problem. You know, having different things that we're passionate about, and, you know, having lots of friends and being able to see different people and do different things, that's brilliant. But when it gets to that point where you feel like you're on a hamster wheel and you're just struggling to keep going, that's when it's a problem. That's when we need to put our boundaries in place. That's when beautiful boundaries really come into their own, because what we really need to look at is what's important. Where is my time most valuable, and where is the best place for me to spend that time? Because the reality is the most important commodity any of us have is time, because it's the one thing we never get back. And where we spend our time and our energy is critical really for us in the way that we live. So what we really want to be thinking is, well, where is it most important for me right now to be spending my time and energy? And I talk about the wheel of life as well, and looking at that as a way to really understand, well, what's important for me right now? Where do I need to be spending my time? And at different stages of our life, at different times of our life, sometimes even just within a week, those things can shift. Maybe one week you need to really focus on your own health and well-being, or exercise, or eating, your own physicality. And maybe a few weeks later, you're like, I haven't spent much time with my friends, so I'm feeling a bit disconnected from things, so I need to reprioritize that and refocus on that. Our lives are not like a constant state, and sometimes things need to ebb and flow. And what's really important about knowing where we need to spend our time is that enables us to understand what we need to say no to. And I talk a lot about this tool called yes to this and no to that. Because for me, that tool changed my life, and it was given to me by my amazing coach Phil when I started to work from him. And he could see my busyness, as I've sort of characterized speaking earlier. You know, that was just one weekend out of hundreds of weekends I could choose that were very similar. And he said to me, well Mel, you only have so many hours in the day, so actually if you say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. It's just like, that's just, you know, It just is the way that it is. You can't, unless you figured out how to clone yourself. And I was like, no, can you tell me how to do that? That would be amazing. And he taught me this really simple tool, which was like, well, if you're saying yes to working late, you're saying no to going home and getting the food that you need and the rest that you need. And is that okay? And sometimes, yes, the answer to that question was yes. Actually, yes, it is okay because I'm going for a promotion, or I've got a really important piece of work that needs priority. So I need to say yes to that, which for a short period is going to mean that I say no to like getting dinner properly and having my sleep. Oh my God, a friend's phoned me and she really needs me. So I'm going to say no to yoga tonight because she really needs me. And there's no right or wrong answer to that debate. It's just starting to understand, well, you literally cannot be in two places at once. You can't be all things to all people because in that way you please no one. So actually, what are the things that I need to be saying yes to and what's important? And it gives you that opportunity to pause and say, okay, I'm saying yes to that date. What do I need to say no to? And how do I do that in a way that feels like I'm being fair and being right and doing the right thing by myself? And I think what's powerful about that tool is that you enable a conversation to happen. And I use this example a lot with people who are busy at work and find it difficult to delegate. They tend to be perfectionists too. Funny that. I'll often say to them, well, if you've got a list of your priorities of the things that you need to achieve in a day, and people keep coming to you and asking you to do other things, you can then say, well, look, I have these 10 things here, which are really important, and I only have so many hours left in the day. So which of these things can I let go of or say no to so that I can do those things? And very quickly then you start to have a conversation, especially it's brilliant if you're delegating upwards. So with a boss, for example, you would say, oh, okay, I've got these 3 things that you've asked me to do that need to be done by the end of the week. And you're now asking me for these 3 things. So which is most important for me to focus on first? Because I can't do all of that today. And you can apply that same logic in your personal life as well, to personal engagements, to things that are going on, to tasks. And I think it helps you put those boundaries in place, because the second I'm trying to think, basically what you don't want is to be a doormat where you say yes to everything and people just trample over you. You need to have some things in place that show the world that you are important, and that the way you look after yourself, the tone for how other people treat you as well. So this idea of being busy and being productive and, doing lots of things is great. But the second it depletes you, I think it's a real sign that your boundaries need some work, and you need to start thinking about, well, where do I need to prioritize? What's important? And is where I'm spending my time the right place for me to be spending my time?
Yeah, that's so true. So true. What would you say also spending some time alone can help, right? Because that's what I felt. Dedicating some time here and there, just being alone sometimes can help you, breathe a little bit as well, right?
I think it's so important, and I think it's a really, again, I talk about this in the book a bit, but we have this real thing about creating balance, and we need to create balance in everything. And the reality is, in our very busy modern day lives, balance is a bit of an illusion. We spend 5 days a week working 9 till 5 if we're lucky. Most of us work from far longer hours than that. So a lot of our time and our energy to our work, which hopefully, if you're very lucky, or not necessarily very lucky, if you designed it in a certain way that you love your work, that's great. But I talk about this idea of actually, rather than fighting for balance, fight for space, create space. Because what actually is missing a lot of the time is the space to breathe. As you say, space to be on your own, space to think. We meetings in one after the other, so we don't actually have time to absorb what we've done in between meetings. Or we take a course where we are able to learn a new skill, and then we give ourselves no time to learn that skill. Or we'll, pack different things in a weekend, so we don't even have time to breathe or do the chores that we want to do, or take a walk in nature. And actually, that idea of space, I think, becomes really important. So I like to even do it in my diary. I put space in my diary that's just me time, that's space to breathe, space to go for a walk, space to, have a hot bath sometimes and just relax, space to read a book, space to learn, because actually it's that space that makes us feel expanded and rested and fulfilled.
Definitely. And so one last question, because we need to wrap up soon. If you had to pick one thing from your experience or from your expertise with self-care in general, what would you advise to do? Like one thing, the easiest one, please.
It's not the easiest, but I have mentioned it. I think the yes to this and no to that tip is that exercise. I think is fundamental because it starts to put in place many things, and it gives us a window into ourselves as well. I think it starts to really open up questions for yourself about the way that you behave and the way that you act and the things that you do. And I think it's a really good way to start unpacking some of the stories that we tell ourselves as well of, well, I need to be at everything, and I need to, go to this and go to that, and I can't let that person down, and they'll think I'm terrible if I don't do this. And I think it's a really simple and effective tool. And I think that's often what I find is really fascinating about self-care. People think it's so easy and so simple that they forget to do it because it's so easy and simple. When you remind them, it's like, oh my God, yeah, I knew that. So yeah, self-care isn't rocket science. It's not difficult. It's just remembering to take care of yourself and actually giving yourself permission to do it. And I think the yes to this, no to that exercise is something that's really powerful because it does remind us in pretty much every context of our life that we're saying yes to something. Make sure that what you're saying yes to is something that nourishes you and looks after you and actually enriches you in some way.
Amazing. That's such a lovely note to end the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. We've learned so much. We are going to put all the highlights of the podcast on our webpage and a link to your book and your website. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I really loved all the things I've learned from Mel. If you want to get in touch with her for a coaching session or to access her self-care program, go and visit her website at melnoakes.com.